So looking ahead to the planning board schedule, tonight we have two public hearings. One is continued from previously, and the other is a new case. Our next meeting is going to be next week, June 22nd. We have another continued hearing that date. This is on 269 to 301 Vassar Street. It's MIT's graduate student dormitory. That was heard by the board and is coming back with some design changes. And we may have some general business items that we're still working out on June 22nd. On June 29th, we have a public hearing scheduled on a city council zoning petition. This is to amend Article 22 of the zoning ordinance to include requirements on emissions accounting. And so that is the one public hearing we have scheduled June 29th. And on July 6th, we will not have a meeting. We do not have a meeting planned that day, but we expect that we'll pick up meetings again in July, starting on July 13th. And we can give more updates as we go. I believe that is all that I have on the updates for now. Oh, I will note that the Ordinance Committee had a hearing last Thursday on the missing middle housing zoning petition that was held in committee, and we don't believe that there'll be any action on that before the petition reaches its expiration, but there was some discussion of doing some continued work on that with interested community members and city councilors, so we can provide some updates on that as it goes along. So I think that's all. I'm going to see if Iram has something that she wants to add. No, I see her shaking her head, so we can go right to the agenda.
Excellent. All right, the next item on the agenda is approval of meeting minutes. The board has received certified transcripts for the meetings held on May 4th and May 11th, 2021. Are there any questions from board members on those transcripts? If not, is there a motion to accept the transcripts as the meeting minutes? Okay, Steve moved and Louis seconded. Yeah. It's fine. You just need to use your mic so that she can hear you. She can't.
I just need for you to use the mic so it can be on the transcript.
Yeah. So. We have, again, Steve moved, Louis seconded. All those in favor? That's unanimous. All board members voting in favor of accepting the transcripts. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will move on to the next agenda item, which is a continued public hearing on case PB 361, a special permit application by Gaslight Building LLC to renovate.
Catherine, sorry to interrupt with you, but there was one thing that actually wasn't, we kind of skipped over it quickly, but I just wanted to acknowledge there is an item on the agenda for discussion and possible amendment of certain planning board rules regarding remote participation. And I just wanted to indicate for you and for the audience that we sort of put that as a placeholder because we figured there might be some, now that we're past the state of emergency, there were amendments or a suspension of the planning board rules during the state of emergency. Now that we're beyond the state of emergency, there was an indication there might be some legislative action regarding remote participation, so we kept that as a placeholder, but at this point we don't have anything to discuss.
All right, thank you for that, Jeff. I apologize for blowing right past that. All right, so that may come back to us at a future time if the legislature does act such that there are rule changes that we may want to consider. Okay, so now we're moving on to the continued public hearing on PB 361, the special permit application by Gaslight Building LLC to renovate and rehab the existing building and construct an addition for a hotel. I'm sorry, sir.
I'm just asking Mr. Wong is very, very hard of hearing. I'm just asking if everyone could do their best to speak up, please. That's all I wanted to say.
CDD staff will begin by summarizing why this is before us.
Thank you, Catherine. This is Jeff Roberts once again. So this is a special permit application. It was postponed early during the pandemic. It was heard by the planning board in July of last year, and then in December of last year, and then in April. So the application involves a partial renovation of the existing historic building and an addition behind and above the building for use as a 36-room hotel. The site's located in the Central Square Overlay District. The applicant is requesting 6 special permits. There's special permits for building height and for FAR in the Central Square Overlay District. There is a rooftop exemption from gross floor area and an establishment of a formula business, and to exceed limitations on bank frontage. So all of those are special permits that are allowed within the Central Square Overlay District, as well as to waive parking and loading requirements. So the applicant also seeks an exemption of basement area from the calculation of gross floor area, which is a general citywide special permit. At the last hearing, the planning board asked to see more efforts made to reduce the impact of the height and the proposed addition, the height of the proposed addition on abutters. So zoning and urban design staff have responded to some of the new materials that were submitted by the applicant in an updated memo for the planning board. That memo also has the criteria for the board's approval, and staff are present to answer any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, representing the permittee is Sarah Radigan from Trilogy Law LLC to introduce the design presentation.
Good evening. Sarah Radigan, Trilogy Law. I am here representing the owner of Gaslight Building LLC and Chevron Partners, the managing agent and the developer. Marcel Safar is here, the principal, who will also say a few words, and Tony Zhao of Feingold Alexander, the architects. I'm going to be really brief, but I will say that we're all really pleased to be here in person. It did take quite a bit of a pivot for our group to kind of rally around to realize that the legislature was not going to get it together to extend the state of emergency, but I think we're all pretty pleased that we're going to be able to be before you in person. Thank you. Marcel?
Good evening, everyone. I'm asked just to say hello. Didn't say anything. My name is Marcel Safar. It's so wonderful to see everyone in person after all of these efforts. I'm the managing partner of Chevron Partners. Just wanted to say thank you for giving us guidance last time to be able to be back in front of you here today. We also want to thank everyone for at the planning board as well as CDD for all of their efforts over the past 3 or so years in getting us to this point where we hope and we really strove to make the modifications requested for a project that we're proud of that results in a compromise for what I feel is considerate for our neighbors as well as other neighbor constituents in the business community for our project. Just keeping it really brief, just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and I'll turn it over to Tony to review the changes in the project since the last presentation.
Me too. Thank you all. What we want to do is, I think, to really focus in on the...
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Yeah, sorry. My name is Tony Schauer, Principal Director of Design at Feingold Alexander Architects. So I think what we are going to start here is just a simple abbreviated recap. As you, of course, know very well, we have been going through this in almost a year time since July of 2020. And without rattling off the list, there were a number of things that we were asked to respond to, and we believe we attempted in our best effort to address things that dealt with trying to develop more details around the project, scaling elements, lowering the hotel entry, addressing traffic and parking, loading and receiving, addressing light issues, addressing material issues, scaling back the frame with respect to the design, and attempting to look at different things to address more details around the historic part of the building, and then, of course, more recently addressing some of the issues raised in terms of reducing the mass, reducing the bulk, and reducing the scale. So again, without being a comprehensive list, there were a lot of areas that, in particular, the planning board asked us to really pay attention to and focus in on And this is on the submission, but this is at least here as a kind of recap. And so today, we're going to now zero in on the particular focus that we were asked to look at for this evening's presentation. Next. So in the design response to the last board hearing on April 27th, we were asked to further study an additional ability to setback at the 5th floor, and then also to see if there was anything we could do to further scale elements on the design itself, such as the roof parapet and other things at the rear. So we're going to zero in on these particular issues as it relates to the last hearing. So this was the original design that was presented back on December 15th. This does show the relationship of the massing as it was shown at that particular instance, and we do have a model in front of us here which currently shows that design. And then we'll talk about how this has changed. Next. So this is the latest iteration now that we've looked at here. So I will point out a couple of key things. The previous hearing, we had already looked at setting back the 6th floor, approximately 10 feet by 75 feet in dimension, relocating all the mechanical equipment to the top and center, eliminating the common roof deck, largely reducing or limiting stair head houses, elevated head houses, and further refining the design. And then subsequent at that hearing, we were asked to further study an additional setback at the 5th floor. So this particular massing now shows further setback, also the full 75 feet in width, 4 feet in depth, which is what you see in this particular instance. The net result of these two setbacks combined is a loss of approximately 1,015 square feet of hotel space and a reduction in the hotel count as a result of these changes. Next. So again, this is the original design in the cost section that we had previously shown, relating the overall design approach. Again, as a reminder, the hotel component largely consists of levels 4 to 6 with partial level 3 for hotel use. The rest is commercial and office. And here you see in the revised design, all the areas in sort of pink and red is where we scaled back the design as a response to the comments that were raised at this commission. So you can see here now it also incorporates the 5th floor setback in addition to the 6th floor setback. And of course it continues on up to the top of the roof with mechanical elements occur as we move all those away from the rear. From a perspective of the rear, this is the north elevation looking at the back, and this shows you the areas that are highlighted, the amount of setback that is occurring at the 5th floor and the 6th floor, which carves out this amount of space in that rear side. This was the previous view that we had shown looking up at the original design, and the next image will show the relationship of the changes. So everything you see here is how we scaled back. So of course the area at the top in red is that all of those elements like the stair head houses, elevator penthouses, deck areas, mechanical areas, all that has been eliminated and reduced. The 6th floor we previously showed, and now the 5th floor is the additional setback that occurs in this current iteration. And then there's also a very faint secondary dash line just hovering below the top dash line. That's where we further reduced the parapet at the 6th floor in order to minimize the impact down to the lowest parapet that we could create for those roof elements. So it's a reduction of approximately just under 2 feet in the parapet and section to further scale back that level. Here you see in this roof plan on the left, that's the original design, which we previously had, of course, common shared roof deck for hotel gas and mechanical elements. And then on the right is the current design. Again, relocating the mechanical all to the center of the roof, in the middle, and then stepping back the elements at the back, and eliminating the stair head house overruns, and reducing the elevator penthouse overruns. And by the elimination of the common roof decks also, we are attempting to create a green roof to the greatest extent we can on the remaining roof, since it's no longer going to be occupied for hotel or public use. Here we see on the 6th floor plan, this shows that 10 feet by 75 foot setback is resulting of the loss of a hotel room in order to squeeze this particular plan configuration in. And here you see on the 5th floor, the additional 4 foot by 75 foot setback, also primarily impacting the hotel room size as a result of squeezing down the layouts of the rooms within the hotel plan. These cross sections were just, again, illustrative of the section of mass out on the lower left, illustrates the cross section from Mass Ave, the details that we previously described emphasizes the elevations and sections at the parapet at the existing hotel on the 4th level, and then the top parapet at the 6th. And because we eliminated the common roof deck elements, we did eliminate the railing because it's no longer needed. It also does show the cross-section stepping in, and then to the right, the section on Temple Street. It simply illustrates the view axis taken across the street and the fact that the relocated mechanical area is not visible in this cross-section view. Here we see a more detailed exploration of the roof plan. It does show primarily outlined in blue and in red the relocation mechanical screens. We did, as a result of relocating, we lowered the height of the vault of mechanical screen down by 2 feet. So the blue area is 8'11", and the area around the generator is the only remaining part that is a higher 10'11". And again, it will be treated with acoustic elements to baffle the noise as a result of the mechanical equipment. Here we had previously shown the shadow studies taken at the top on June 21 at 9 a.m., noon, and 3, and at the lower level at September 21 at 9, noon, and 3. The key thing taken away from this is that the areas that are outlined in purple represent the redesigned amount of shadow in the current configuration with the setbacks, and the area in red is the amount of shadow we reduced from the original design as a result of these step back areas. I will point out in part that when you look at it, particularly in June, a good part of the shadows basically do not cast on the building because of the high sun angle, and it does begin emerge at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And on September, again, at 9 a.m., it is not casting on the building due to the angle. It starts to emerge at noon, and then, of course, by the time we get to 3, the shadow is extending across the rear facade. Next. Top row just shows that December 9, 12, and noon. We do know, of course, December has the most longest shadow elements just because the sun is the lowest in the sky. And for all intents and purposes, mostly throughout the day in December, even in the morning, the building is largely casting shadows, both existing and proposed. And then at the bottom row, March 21, at 9, 12, and 3, it is essentially almost a mirror image of September 21, just at the other season, but very similar. Here you see on a perspective view, this shows again, a revised design. So now not only is the 6th floor setting back, but the 5th floor is setting back, which begins to emerge in that element that is highlighted in red. And then again, coming back to the front, a restatement of the fact that this is a repositioning of this particular building, not only the restoration of the historic gas and light building, but capturing a frontage retail along the entire streetscape, all of it which is accessible, and bringing not only life to the existing historic building, but also by capturing the new design that is engendering a mixed-use development to revitalize this part of the park in this particular building. So again, we do have a model here. There are additional slides from the previous hearing if needed, and we can refer to the model at any time you wish. And I also have some material samples as well, which was asked about.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now go to public comment. This is a public hearing, and as of 5 p.m. yesterday, the board had received 24 written communications. Written communications received after 5 p.m. yesterday will be entered into the record. We'll begin by calling on speakers who signed up to speak, but after that, anyone else who is present and wishes to speak on this case will have an opportunity to speak. Each speaker should begin by giving their name and address, and will have 3 minutes to speak before I ask you to wrap up. Okay. The first person who signed up as a maybe to speak is Peter Valentine. Mr. Valentine, would you like to speak?
Yes, I just want to remember that.
Just give your name and address for the record, please.
Please give your name and address.
Yeah, Peter Valentine, 37 Brookline Street, Cambridge, Mass. I just want to state that, for the record, I've attended hundreds of council meetings, and I'm very glad that you are persevering with this very civilized activity, and I wish that you continue it forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next person who has signed up, I believe, is Dwayne Gallander.
Just state
Can I
your
take
name
this
and,
off?
just state your name and address. And
You can take this off, right? My name is Dwayne Callender, longtime resident of Cambridge. Grew up on Hubbard Ave, North Cambridge, Porter Square, but now I live in 160 Cambridge Park Drive. And I've been with ACT for over 3 years, trying to get housing for homeless people, even for myself, etc. But I have family that live inside the building behind this place that they want to put the hotel. And all the people that I've been working with who are trying to get housing for people, especially Cheryl Ann, who they dedicated that building to, it's like a cold smack in the face to put this hotel there after all this work that all these activists have put together to get housing for people and et cetera, and even low income and even moderate people. Also, where are the people going to go once they get in this hotel? We're in a pandemic. And all these places are closing on Mass Ave. I've been in Cambridge all my life. I ain't never seen so many buildings close. There's got to be at least 20 buildings that closed in the last year, and you want to put a hotel, but I don't understand that. But my thing is, we need to get housing for people that are homeless. There's so many homeless people. Some of them are my friends, and I don't see nobody coming to do anything about that. But recently, it seems like people are talking about it because of the pandemic, but still, I don't see the need for the hotel. I have family that live in there. We need better things to be built in hotels, banks, or whatever in Cambridge. And people come here to Cambridge to get housing because this is probably one of the better places to get it. And it seems like Cambridge is a sanctuary for people who don't have anywhere to live. And I don't see nobody doing nothing about that on a regular or having meetings on a regular to concern those that are living in the street through the pandemic, etc. But I oppose this, so that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, you're signed up next, but it's not clear if you want to speak.
I believe he does.
Okay.
thank you so much.
My name is Jun Wang, a resident of Temple Place Apartments. I absolutely opposite the new building will be built so close to our apartments, where if so, our residents will eternal living under the shadow of the new building. Will lose sunlight, fresh air, or privacy and peacefulness. So I hope the planning board deny the application of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Lee Ferris.
For audibility, I'm taking off my mask. My name is Lee Ferris, 269 Norfolk Street. And I want to make note that tonight is the first night that we are back without any option for virtual communication, so there are a reasonable number of people here, but I hope you'll take extra consideration of the 24 emails that you received. I believe all of them are against this project, and opposition to this project is growing. I'm asking you to oppose this boutique hotel, and I want to respond to some of the comments made at the last planning board hearing about access to light for the tenants, the low-income and mostly elderly tenants in Cheryl Ann's place, of whom you just heard from one. Like many of you, I'm a homeowner. I have a 4-story building across the street from me, a 4-story building 7 feet away from me on one side, and buildings on the other 2 sides that are the same height as my building and are 6 to 15 feet away. Yet, I have decent access to light because I have windows on all 4 sides of my house. I heard several planning board members in the last meeting make a false analogy between their own access to light and what the tenant's access to light would be if this building is built. Like me, the planning board members that spoke about this have light on all 4 sides of their houses, and many of them have a yard, and the nearby buildings are not several floors taller than their own homes. The tenants in this building only have light coming from windows on one side of their apartment. People in a house have light on 4 sides. Like me, the planning board members chose their homes while knowing what the access to light would be. The tenants in this building do not get to choose. They don't even get to choose whether they live in that building, practically speaking. Like me, the planning board members are able to leave their homes to get light, but some of these elderly tenants cannot go out. And I also want to note that it is established scientific fact that moving a frail 90-year-old tenant, whether within the building or to another building, could actually increase the chances of their death. So I don't think that's a good solution unless the tenant actually asks for it. I want to support the comments of 2 planning board members from the last meeting, Mary Flynn and Catherine Preston Connolly, who both said that the guidelines for granting the special permit conflict between the tenant's rights and the historic preservation. I ask you to prioritize the guidelines that protect the tenants. Thank you.
Next speaker will be Dan Totten.
Hi, my name is Dan Totten. I live at 54 Bishop Allen Drive, number 2, just down the street from this site. So I want to build off something that Lee said, which is that the opposition has been building with each meeting, and I've come to all 4 of them since last summer. It's great to see everybody in person. One thing that should be stated about the recent round of emails is that the YWCA sent an email that was pretty strongly opposed to the project. They said that they're concerned about the well-being of the tenants at 5 Temple Place, and they're concerned that it would have an adverse impact on their lives. They also said that the community engagement was insufficient. I think that's really important because they're an abutter, and they're obviously an institution in the community. I would like to focus on this idea that the current design is pushing the addition towards the tenants in the rear of the building in order to diminish the impact of the addition on the developer's bottom line. Moving the massing of the building more towards Mass Ave and over towards the center of the building would result in a design that better met the needs of the low-income tenants. This option might make it challenging to preserve the historic interior of the building, but of course, the interior is not subject to the Historical Preservation Ordinance. The reality is that the developers are refusing to pursue this option because it would cost them additional money, including disruption to their current commercial tenants who are paying rent. And that fundamental choice to prioritize the project's profit over important quality of life issues for the low-income people living behind the building, the view over Mass Ave, we're saying the view from Mass Ave is more important than the quality of life from the people behind the building. And these are people who have told us they're concerned about their mental health, and they're concerned about the ability of their spouses to survive if they lose their sunlight. So, the other thing I want to comment on is just that there was a shadow study in the presentation, and that shadow study wasn't sent to any members of the public ahead of time, unlike the last round. And it would have been really nice to have had that ahead of time because, I'm not unreasonable, and if we can demonstrate that this is not going to have the impact that we want, then that's great. But there was no way for us to do it, and I can't look up there like from back here. It's just impossible. So I hope there'll be some more careful look at that, and you guys are experts, and really look at it and really think about whether it meets the needs of the tenants or not. And if it doesn't, I really, really hope you'll reject it. I think you have all the rationale in the world in terms of the criteria violating B and C, creating a detrimental nuisance and hazard, creating an adverse impact on the Temple Place apartments, and then also just from the preamble, of course, conserving health and light and air is part of the zoning code. You guys have an opportunity to do justice tonight. We've heard a lot about the history and how the planning board has been not doing justice over history, and tonight is the night to do it. Thank you.
The next speaker is Gavin Malk. No? Okay. Then next is James Williamson, please.
Thank you. So I'll do the same thing that Lee did. James Williamson, 1000 Jackson Place, Jefferson Park in North Cambridge, a 50-year resident of Cambridge. Spent a lot of time in Central Square. First of all, I wrote to, for lack of a better idea, wrote to Iram Farouk twice, starting over a week ago, asking, is there going to be a shadow study? Are you guys asking for a shadow study? I didn't even get the courtesy of a reply. No, we're not. Yes, we are. It's not up to us. So there was, no information at all about whether there was even going to be a shadow study. Now we find out, I looked through the materials, I don't see the shadow study in the materials. Well, why not? Why wasn't that in the materials? And then they put up, and I couldn't even really figure out what they were talking about, what Mr. Siao was talking about. Was it a new revised study or not? The tiny little image in the lower right-hand corner is that I happen to have red-green color blindness, but never mind. I couldn't make out what the hell he was talking about. I mean, this is ridiculous. Please, come on, people. Do we deserve to have a shadow study, and do you and to the residents and to the public, to the citizenry in a democratic republic, have the right to see and adequately assess a shadow study, or do we not? Okay, maybe we should just end the hearing right now. Okay, just to recap, this whole thing got off to a very bad start when Mr. Sullivan at the Historical Commission decided in his wisdom that he would make a private deal with the developers and with the architect. He would meet with them privately, negotiate with them, get some things that he thought were good, and that was enough. Well, it should have been brought before the Historical Commission, and it should have been brought before the public, and we probably wouldn't be here now. Because why does this matter? Because the public would have raised the issue of the residents of the building behind this building, which is described even by Mr. Sullivan as one of the most important, historically important buildings in Central Square. People could have raised concerns about building on top of it, but more importantly, they could have raised issues about the people living in the building behind, which I believe Mr. Sullivan was really not paying any attention to. Then it came to the planning board. I raised this issue. Mr. Thorkelson said, and there was no opportunity to rebut because by then, the public were muted. Mr. Thorkelson said it had been strongly supported by the Historical Commission. Well, evidently he misspoke because it had never been heard by the Historical Commission. So there were inadvertently misleading remarks made to the planning board at that first hearing. So we're behind the 8 ball. We're fighting gravity. This whole thing has been cooked. It's presented to you, and we are now fighting to get you to go like, hey, wait a minute. What about the people who live in this building right next door? They're building right up to the property line, within 6 feet of the property line. Without an adequate shadow study, we're not going to be able to tell what the change in the impact is. Clearly, it violates many of the criteria much of the zoning, but
Thank you, Mr. Williamson.
please don't allow this to go forward. Thank
It will
you.
be Heather Hoffman.
You might want that. Okay. Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. I haven't spoken about this before, and what I've done in the hearings that I've listened to is listen to what people have said, what members of the public have said, what planning board members have said, and I've also thought about everything that I have learned in the years that I've been listening to people, and listening to James Williamson, who has taught me a ton. I've listened to other people who live in public housing, who live in affordable housing, and because of the pandemic, we got to hear from people who were living on the streets and in shelters, speak at city council meetings about what matters to them. And that taught me a whole lot. And anything I get wrong is because I didn't listen well enough, not because they didn't teach well enough. But what I understand is that this is a commonwealth and that we owe something to all of the people around us. And that profit is not the most important thing. Yes, businesses have to pay the bills. I understand that. But you know, I keep thinking about the name of this building, the Gaslight Building, and about the metaphorical meaning of its name. What are we talking about? What do we owe to the people we have put in public housing? What we're seeing right now around the city is that apparently we do not owe them trees, we do not owe them light, we do not owe them space, we do not owe them air, because what we are doing is cramming more and more and more into the places where there are already people who do not have the advantages that I, like Lee, as she described, and others have to get around. So what do we owe to them? Do we tell them, you know what, it's really kind of more important for these guys to make a profit? I mean, they made a huge deal of how much they were giving up. Well, what they're giving up is money. And what we're asking the people at Temple Place to give up is what makes life worth living. I personally don't think that that's a hard decision. But I'm not the planning board, and I don't have to say yes or no. And you do. So I hope that you will think really hard about what matters and what you want to be remembered for and what you want people in the future to think we think matters. Thank you.
Thank you. The last person who's signed up is Chandra Betta, and it is unclear whether or not they want to speak.
She's here for the other hearing.
Okay. Here for the other hearing. All right. That is the last person we have signed up to speak. Is there anyone else present who would like to speak on this matter?
Quentin Zondervan, 235 Cardinal Medeiros Avenue, Cambridge City Councilor. Madam Chair, members of the Planning Board, we have just lived through, hopefully, the worst pandemic in a century. And one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that we are really not doing justice for our people. We have had to work overtime and fight hard for the basic rights of people to be safe and to survive. And what we're being asked today is to choose between the interests of people who are already wealthy and already privileged and people who are living in affordable housing and already have so little. Why would we choose to give the people who already have so much even more? Do we need another hotel in Central Square? Do we need a hotel on top of this building? Do we need that hotel to be pushed all the way to the back of the building, right up next to an affordable housing building, just so that the developers proposing this building can make more money? I don't think we do. And I hope that the end of this pandemic, at least in Cambridge, is the beginning of a new era of justice in Cambridge, where we choose the people over profit. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present who wants to be heard on this matter? All right, seeing none, we will now move from public comment to board discussion. We have received a memo on this application from the community development staff and have previously received memos from Traffic, Parking, and Transportation and the Department of Public Works. And there are members of staff here to answer questions. Yes?
Madam Chairwoman, I was wondering if we could just briefly comment. We have been under the impression that public comment was going to be quite limited to the issues of just the modifications of the design. And we have been under that impression and perhaps not rallied some of our supporters to be in attendance. And the public comment period was a little bit more of a broad public comment period than we had anticipated. I just wanted Mr. Safar to be able to make one brief comment and then response.
If that's not all right.
No, please go ahead.
I just wanted to reiterate that was our impression.
Mm-hmm.
And for our supporters as well, it would have been important to be here for that to submit theirs. If it's possible, we could submit it after the fact. We had submitted from the restaurants and all of the retailers and our supporters who have reached out to us since the last public hearing, really in support of our project as well. But we were just not under the impression that that was the hearing tonight, so we did not put it into the hearing. We would be happy to submit that after the fact.
Okay. Thank you. Certainly, it is, as we discussed last time, we were focused on those design changes. However, the public has an opportunity to comment, and it is always, their prerogative to whether even when we ask, as I failed to do this evening, to focus the comments, so that they can choose to say a broad variety of things, so it usually behooves an applicant to bring any supporters that they have. But I apologize for any miscommunication that may have caused. Okay, as what I was saying before, we did receive memos from staff. They are here to answer questions, as obviously is the applicant, and so we're moving now to board member questions before we actually have discussion. So are there clarifying questions for either the staff or applicant? Yeah, Mary?
Two things. One is on the revised design with the massing removed. You show a variety of sight lines that result from that massing going back, being taken away, rather. So I just want to be sure I understand correctly. So the line that goes to the street and the base of the building, and then goes up, looks like it hits then at the top of the 5th floor. Is that correct? Okay, it's that one. Okay, so that bottom line over by the housing, the sight lines that you're showing. All right, go to the base of the building, and that line right there, which then goes up to the 5th floor. Okay, so that means that if somebody lives in that unit and they look up, their sight, what they're going to see is the top of that floor. Is that correct? I'm just trying to figure out exactly what people are seeing.
Thank you, Mark, for the question. First of all, point of clarification, I believe on the first floor of the contemplated apartment that is parking. But in any event, what we're trying to illustrate in these cross sections is that when you step back and take a mapping line, you know where the sight line or the view angle line starts to open up more because it's literally pushing back. And you can see it in relation to the original design in red, where because the design thrust forward more towards Temple Place, the project, the sight line is literally moving off with it because you're starting more fuel. So I think the redesign in response to the comments we see here is attempting to show that.
Okay, so to your point that, it's a common room or whatever on the first floor. So the first set of housing units then would be on the second. And if we follow that sight line up, it looks as though you would be able to see up to the sky.
It starts to open up more. Certainly compared to the individual design.
Okay. Okay, and would it be possible for you to go through the shadow study information one more time? Because I wasn't really clear on what was happening with it either.
I would just note, if you're going to speak to the model, you should still go to the microphone. If you want to point to something, maybe having one person point and the other person speak.
Could you rotate the model so the rest of the board can see it?
I think the table moves. If you want to try rolling it, you might need to unlock the wheels.
What we're trying to demonstrate here, and I think what we're also trying to demonstrate in the shadow studies, is that when we scale back the fifth floor, catapult, and move everything away from this particular edge, we believe it is a substantive increase in the amount of light and views that begin to open up. And with respect to those shadow studies, again, I'll just explain this. The color code represents different shadow based on different massing. So the blue shadow represents currently the existing building before anything is added, just simply the existing building. The purple shadow, I know, I'm sorry if the color is a little hard for folks to read, but the purple shadow, which is the one that is kind of breaking through, that represents this revised design impact, which is basically beyond the blue. The red shadow, which particularly becomes evident perhaps in the bottom right-hand view, that represents this original design when we had not done the step back on the massing. So in other words, because we had pulled back the massing pretty substantially as a result of the redesign shift, we're increasing the amount of light, increasing the amount of sun, reducing the amount of shadow as a result of the change in the massing and its volume, because we're carving away from the edge. I think what I tried to describe before, if one looks closely at these shadow studies, particularly, for example, at June 21 at 9 a.m., all the shadows being cast in this direction, so it is not affecting the rear at all. Essentially, at noon, the shadows just start to begin to creep up on the bottom of the existing building at back, which is in the purple. And then at 3 p.m., the shadow does extend over more of the rear facade because, of course, what afternoon sun is later in the day, and the shadow gets steeper. Similarly, when you look at the bottom row, which is September 21, again at 9 a.m., both the existing shadow and the new shadows are essentially not casting anything on the existing buildings. At noon, again, it starts to creep up on the existing building, and then at 3, essentially, it does shadow the rear, but so does the existing building. So that's really the direct implication, and I think the next series slide, one more slide. So again, in December at 9 and 12 and at 3, essentially most of the building is in shadow because it's largely cast by existing buildings, particularly tall buildings like this, and this, and the sun is so low in the sky in December that it's all in shadow for the most part. And at noon, of course, it does the same thing, and at 3. So December, the amount of daylighting is less just because of the nature of the sun. And then at the bottom row in March 21, essentially it's almost very similar to September 21, just at the spring equinox instead of the fall equinox. But if you compare the two shadows, they're pretty similar in the spring and in the fall. So that, I hope, helps to explain, but again, the massing model, I think also we believe it helps illustrate the change between the original design and the current design.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful.
Are there other clarifying questions for the applicant or for staff? If not, then we can move to board discussion. Steve?
I guess somebody has to start. You know, as I'm looking at this and thinking about this.
Could Steve bring the mic down a little closer to his mouth?
Yeah. Okay. As I'm thinking about this, I'm trying to figure out exactly what principles and what criteria to be used in trying to evaluate these contrary perspectives and interests here. And I think I came up with two general approaches. One was what are the reasonable expectations of abutters, and the other general principle is, when there are differing perspectives and interests, from my perspective anyway, I look for a reasonable balancing of the interests, not necessarily going for one party's interest or the other, but seeking a reasonable balancing of the two. So going to that first principle, the one of the reasonable expectations, I'm thinking about what are the reasonable expectations of the residential property there, and I note that the residential property, first of all, was constructed adjacent to a commercial district, and a district which did not have substantial setback requirements. And I note also that the residential property was constructed very close to the property line. And so, in essence, the property is very close to a property which could be constructed very close to their property line. So there are different ways of thinking about that. I mean, I can look at the current residents and say, hey, I don't want something built close to me, and that's an understandable human reaction, and we are humans and we care about human reactions. But on the other hand, I see that this building was built close to the property line of a property which could be built at significant height, very close to the property line. And while I, as all the other members and all of us are very humane people and care much about human feelings and hopes and expectations in life, we're still a planning board, and we really have to focus on land use laws and policies. And so when I look at that, I have to bear in mind that this residential property was built in a location close to commercial, which could be built right there. And having done so, it's a little bit confusing, at least, or disconcerting, perhaps, to suggest that having done so, that they would have the right to then limit the abilities of construction on that commercial property. So that's one perspective that I have. The other perspective that I have, and I think it's one that most of us on this board take, is we frequently hear different perspectives. We hear from the perspectives of applicants, and they may be perfectly reasonable and rational interests that the applicants present. But then we hear of the interests of abutters, and their interests might also be perfectly reasonable and rational interests. And most often, we can't look at one set of interests and say, no, they're wrong. No, they are irrational. No, they're both reasonable and rational, and it seems to me that very often our job, certainly my perspective of my job here, is not to say one or the other, but rather to listen and try to understand the contrary interests and to come up with a reasonable balancing of those interests, essentially a compromise of the interests. And I guess by the very nature of that sort of process, neither one of the parties gets exactly what they want, but each party gets some consideration from our process. And so applying that sort of thinking and reasoning to this situation, We started with a plan. I thought it was a perfectly reasonable plan, a rational plan, a good plan, fine. But then we heard from the abutters, and the abutters said, well, yeah, and even though we are built so close to the property line, and even though we built adjacent to commercial property, nevertheless, it's having an impact on us, and we would prefer that not be the case. Well, do we go one way or the other? Well, it seems to me that the applicants have presented to us today precisely what I aspire to, and that is a balancing of the interests. They've made adjustments to their plan and their property that makes a significant impact and improvement for the residential neighbors. Does it totally satisfy the neighbors? Does it totally address all of their concerns? No, it doesn't. But it does represent exactly what I described as an aspiration for the sort of process that I believe in anyway, and that is a reasonable balancing of interest, a reasonable accommodation of the abutters. And so, I think that sort of reasonable accommodation has been presented to us today. And so, just quickly summarizing, on the one hand, we have abutters that are right on top of the property line without much setback. We have applicants who aren't even required to have substantial setbacks, but we are, willing to accommodate the residential abutters. And then going to the second subject, I believe the applicants, have made reasonable, significant, meaningful adjustments and accommodations to the reasonable interests and concerns and aspirations of the residential abutters. Have you satisfied them perfectly? Clearly not. We've heard from some of the abutters, clearly not. You have not entirely satisfied them. It would be nice if you had, but it wasn't the case. But I think that they have made compromises, meaningful compromises, and I think that they have arrived at a reasonable accommodation and compromise of the interests. So taking into account both of those two perspectives that I've described, I think that we have arrived on with a plan and an application that has been adjusted, that has been reasonably and meaningfully revised to accommodate the interests of the residential abutters. And I think, having said that, I think that this process has worked. Probably neither parties here are perfectly satisfied. One might you believe that if nobody is perfectly satisfied, maybe we've done a good job. But in any event, I think the interests of both parties have been somewhat accommodated with this design. Neither party is perfectly satisfied, but I think that we've ended up with a reasonable compromised accommodation that I could support.
Thank you, Steve. Hugh?
Swati, I sent you a picture. Are you able to put that up on the screen? So, having read Mr. Williamson's comments, which came to us early, I looked for the studies of the sun, and I did a different kind of a study, which was what I call a sun ray study. It's like tracing the path of a ray of sunlight. Where does it, and so I'm trying to understand what happens on the face of the Temple Street building, not on the ground or on the roof.
What?
Okay, so I'll, can I borrow your mic? Just want to. So one of the interesting features here is that south is actually at a 45-degree angle. So the sun comes up in the morning, and it's not until quite late in the morning that it gets around to be able to hit this facade at all. And during the winter and spring, this building blocks out those sun rays. Then at noon, it's about a 45-degree angle. You can see that these setbacks allow more of the building to be seen. When you get around to like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, there's a shot over Pill Hardware. I think that's Pill Hardware, yeah. Which currently exists, but may never, because this building is not built out to anything like the full density. So, thanks. So, what I found was, looking at noon, the entire building is in shade for about 5 months of the year, except for those angles. That's for the top floor apartment. And each floor you go down, you get an extra month of shade. So by the time you get down to the second floor, or the first residential floor, it's like 9 months of shade. And of course, the sun doesn't shine every day, but so the sun does hit that facade. The changes they've made have actually, looks like to me, added about 2 months to everybody's sun access as a result of their carving out the building, and particularly carving out the mechanical room and moving it back, because from about half of the year, it's the shadow of that mechanical room fence that's blocking the sun. If you go back to page 39, which we've been looking at before. So that it makes some difference. Now, I tried pretty hard. Took me quite a while to figure out how to calculate this, to remember my trigonometry from college, and you know, I got awfully used to using computers, and this was like by hand. This is the picture of the various sun rays. The topmost one is labeled February. So between February and October and February, the building is in shade at noon. And then by sometime in mid-May, the entire building is illuminated. So in that, it's that February to May period where there's a difference depending on. There was a comment about we shouldn't talk about our own houses, but I'm going to talk about my house because it's next to the Longfellow School, which is about twice the height of my house, or maybe 3 times the height to my second floor windows. And I don't see the sun through those windows for 5 months or so, or 6 months. I do have windows on the other side of the house, but of course I can look out and see sunny things sometimes, but the sun doesn't come into my house. So it's a house I bought 50 years ago. So clearly I found that to be not totally disqualifying. Yes, there's a ray of sun that shoots through around 8 or 9 in the morning in between the houses across the street. That's sort of, it's only there for 10 or 15 minutes. I guess my personal choice is it's not totally disqualifying, but again, I have other options. I move out of the house during the day. I can look in other directions. So I think a number of people have said this is a decision about, is the way Steve phrased it, it's balancing interests. I think these people have done as much as they can and still preserve most of the value of their project and most of the number of rooms. They've lost some rooms. Some of the rooms are smaller. Some of the suites are gone. All of those are significant hits on income. I guess my other comment is I was amazed by the description of the technical and structural difficulty of doing this project. That if you want to preserve a lot of the old building, you can't apply any new loads to it, so that the whole building, as I understand it, is the new addition on the back supports everything that's cantilevered out in front of it. And that's an amazing structural feat. And I'm sure it is not, it's going to be difficult to do in a confined area. It's not going to be easy to do, but it's possible to do it. So, because I was trying to, that was explanation came in response to my comment, well, why don't you just shove it forward and figure out something the Historic Commission can live with? And that's the reason. There's a hard technical reason is, yeah, you can do that, but you have to gut the building, support the facade, build a whole new building. And that's not the way we preferably preserve buildings. I guess I would support the current scheme. I think they've done a lot to improve the situation for the abutters. And I think we've got to figure out if that's enough. But I think if we determine that it's not enough, I'm not at all convinced this project will survive. So that's my thinking on this.
Thank you, Hugh. Tom?
Well, there are a number of special permit requests in front of us, and this is with this application. And just looking through those, in my opinion, the vast majority of them, the basement FAR, the parking and loading, which we discussed at length, thanks to Lou's leadership in the last hearing, the bank frontage, which exists today, the formula business, which exists today, again in the form of Bank of America, and the additional FAR. All of those have been discussed at length, and I think the impacts on Central Square and the city as a whole are relatively de minimis. So it does come down to the issue of height, and I very much appreciated Mr. Cohen's description of the dilemma that we face and the balancing that all of us are feeling intensely tonight and have in the past hearings over the balancing of the interests across the property line. So I really appreciate the description of going back to first principles on planning and on property law to organize my thoughts around this and further Hugh's analysis and his trigonometry around the shadow studies in the sun rays on that wall is reassuring to this planning board member that in fact the gauntlet that we have run the applicant through over these series of hearings, now almost 11 months, has borne fruit and has allowed for sun and views of the sky to be had in that building in the stories that are occupied. So I'm prepared to vote in favor of the special permits requested tonight.
Thank you, Tom. Other comments? Mary?
Well, this has definitely been a tough one. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this project this week, as I'm sure all of my fellow board members have, as we've gone through the materials. I appreciate very much everything that the proponent has done. I think you've gone really above and beyond to take a look at what we asked for and to make improvements. And I think there is an improvement. For me, the question is it enough? And, as I think about, Steve's comments earlier about, the housing project, built right next to a commercial district and built to the lot line, I think that's true. But I also think it's very difficult to find sites where you can build public housing in the city. And then when you do, you're going to want to maximize the number of units you can have. So I think that's the reason why they do it. It's not because, they want their neighbors to stay away. It's just they're trying to serve this public good. As I look at it, I think, the developer has other options for a reuse of this project that wouldn't have 80-foot heights. Maybe they won't be as attractive. I don't know, because we don't know what they are. Maybe it'll be a solid wall across from people. But on this one, I really can't say that I see the benefits of this project outweighing the impact and the nuisance and hazard that it's going to cause for the elderly occupants of that building next door. Put it in another location in the city, and I would say you've done an excellent job. I think the design again is really quite interesting. As Hugh was saying, the whole cantilever approach is quite ingenious, and I think you're to be commended for all of that. But I just think it's the wrong place. I am. Again, I am very, very torn, but I really feel like I have to vote no on this.
Thank you, Mary. Hugh?
Wanted to clarify the setback of the Temple Place Apartments from their property line, which on sheet 17 shows as 17 feet 11 inches. And in fact, there's a line of trees that are now up to about the third floor. Clearly, they were aware of development potential. They could have been much closer. They could have made the building shorter and bulkier. So I wouldn't say they're building right up on the lot line. I'd say there is a significant setback that they did anticipate something.
Thank you, Hugh. Lou?
I don't know how much more to be said about the particulars, but it was a bad situation. When I first saw it, I didn't like the infill in the rear. Don't have to like it, but it's permissible. Then going along and trying to preserve the interior space in the building and learning about the structural aspect of this, I understood. They have also lost a lot of usable space on the roof. They've kind of, all that usable space they had before, and the reconfiguring of the mechanicals, the deep cutbacks into the facade of this building, I think they've made a outstanding effort to try to make this work. It's in a bad spot. I probably, again, I agree, it would have been so much easier to push it forward, but it comes with a whole slew of other problems. So, again, weighing both of them, I think they've done what they can to make this work out, and I think we should move it on.
Thank you, Lou. Ted?
Well, this is indeed a hard one. Has been from the very beginning. I like the concept of it from the very beginning, and I like the design of it, and I thought the design has been improved. And so the proponent knows, even though you didn't have supporters here this evening, we have heard that, and we understand, you know, that there is a large swath of people in Central Square, business people and other people for whom this would be a great benefit, and that it would be a very big positive. And it has always come down, I think, to its proximity to the Temple Place Apartments. And I think if it was going to be housing, and especially affordable housing, we wouldn't have had this discussion in as great detail. But I think there is some feeling, well, this is purely a commercial project, and it's not housing, that has generated a lot of the discussion and a lot of the difficulty. You know, it's not for me to say whether this is the right place for a hotel or not. Obviously, people think it is, and I think the concept of the type of hotel it is, where guests at the hotel will be forced to go out to use Central Square, to use the restaurants, use the stores there, and use public transportation is really a good thing. So it does all come down to the proximity to the other building. And I think, you know, we're going to be faced more and more with questions like this as we start dealing with more and more with climate resiliency issues. We're going to have to build bigger and more dense on the transit. If we're going to say you can't cut down trees, you can't interfere with the tree canopy, we need more open space. We're not going to see buildings sitting on an open locale with a lot of room around them. And you know, I've been very interested in what the public has to say and in what my colleagues have to say about how they feel about this, because it's been gnawing at me. And you know, I understand everybody's position perfectly. And, you know, the people who live in that housing certainly don't have a lot of other options. And yes, I live in a house that's very close on both sides, but I do have a front window and a rear window I can look out. But I think the proponent has done as much as they possibly can to go forward. I don't know that we normally think about what they could do purely as of right. I suspect that they could build a fairly large building, perhaps without any special permits, but only maybe with a design review. And maybe it wouldn't be something we would prefer. You know, weighing all the options and feeling very sympathetic to the people who live in the Temple Place apartments, I think I could support this. I don't know. I'm happy for a lot of it, but have unhappy feelings for the people who live on that side of Temple Place. That I think it will certainly be less pleasant what they have now, although what they have now is not the most attractive situation. At the end, I think I can support it.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Share many of Ted's feelings on this, and in particular, the concern that the as-of-right allows for a taller building to be built closer than this is planned, because I do agree that the concerns here really boil down to how tall, how close, and as much as we sometimes like to think if we say no, the project just stops. In reality, the project transforms. There is an economic need at this point. There's an investment. There's a need to make back some amount of that investment. Maybe it's not this developer. Maybe it's someone else who does all commercial, who does a different project that doesn't have the same kind of benefits to the Central Square businesses that a hotel might, and who does build closer and taller than this is. That to me is really kind of how I get to I feel like I am acting in the best interests of the residents of Temple Place as well as the rest of the city, because frankly, the underlying zoning allows for more. And, you know, I know that's not a great comfort to anyone who is going to see this building go up next to them. But it is, you know, a reminder that by the time something gets to us for a special permit, we are working with the developer to make the best project under the existing zoning. And the existing zoning here says that what this developer has done in terms of compromising and in terms of accommodating some step backs and light to reach as many of the neighbors as possible without admittedly sacrificing their investment is better than someone else would have to do. That is not a comfortable place to be, and like my colleagues, I have agonized over this a lot, but that is essentially the calculus that I have done in concluding that we have indeed reached kind of the place where those interests have balanced, and to push it further jeopardizes a worse outcome for the residents. So, based on that, I think I'm hearing that a majority of the board is ready to take action on this item. And to do so, we need to go through the findings of the various special permits requested. Are there any comments from board members before I do that? All right.
Yeah,
Yes, Steve.
I guess I just want to make one comment to Mary. Your reasonable, heartfelt comments, but one of the main principles that you said is that because there's such an important interest in affordable housing, when they build, they may not build closer to the lot line, or they have limited options, and they do it, and so we understand that, and we're compromising and accommodating because they don't have great options, and it's a goal that we all support. But the question here isn't, whether or where or how they build, and whether they are violating setbacks and so forth. The question here is, having done so, is it reasonable and appropriate and necessary to then limit and compromise the interests of their abutters? And that's really the issue here. So I totally support you on the one point, that we have to bend, and we will bend as much as we can in order to support affordable housing. I guess where I differ, though, is having bending in order to provide that affordable housing. I would not necessarily feel morally or otherwise obligated to then limit or compromise the legitimate and reasonable interests of their abutters.
As several board members have noted, this is a really hard one, and I think one which we can all respect. There can be differences of opinion and priorities, and just it's as was also noted, sadly, I think we're probably not going to see so many easy ones again. But with that, let me go through the findings, and I will ask, as I at various places, if any board members have any board members voting in favor of granting the special permits have any concerns or conditions that they want to place on things above and beyond those listed in the staff memos, to ensure that we can make the findings. So for the Central Square Overlay District special permit, the proposed development is consistent with the goals and objectives of the Central Square Action Plan, encouraging a responsible and orderly development, strengthen the retail base to more completely serve the needs of the neighborhoods, preserve the square's cultural diversity, create active, people-oriented spaces, provide the physical and visual and improve the physical and visual environment, provide retail establishments that serve people of diverse economic and social groups who live in the surrounding neighborhoods. Building and site designs are consistent with urban design plan for Central Square as outlined in the Central Square Action Plan and the Central Square Development Guidelines. Building and site designs are adequately screen the parking provided and are sensitive to the contributing buildings in the vicinity. And no National Register or contributing building is demolished or so altered as to terminate or preclude its designation either now or within the past 5 years. Any concerns about making those findings? Okay, seeing none. We have a special permit for Central Square, in the Central Square Overlay District for exemption of rooftop spaces from the calculation of gross floor area. Attorney Radigan, is that permit still needed?
I need you to speak in the mic, please.
Apologies for that. Yes, there's the lower roof that continues to have some use as terrace.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. The rooftop spaces are located and designed to minimize impacts on neighboring uses, including but not limited to light trespass, noise, or other nuisance, and may place further requirements or conditions on the design or operational aspects of the rooftop space, including but not limited to hours of operation, range of activities permitted, signage and lighting fixtures, visual screening devices, sound mitigation, and other measures to ensure ongoing compliance with the findings. Any concerns about that finding? No. I should note that there is also a special permit for building height up to 80 feet and combined residential and non-residential FAR up to 4.0. That requires the same special permit findings as the first group I read. So we are still comfortable making those special permit findings. Reduction of parking and loading requirements in the Central Square Overlay District. The total development authorized on the site is reduced to 90% of the maximum permitted on the lot, or a cash contribution is made to the Central Square Improvement Fund in an amount equal to 50% of the cost of construction of the parking spaces not provided. Subject lot is sufficiently small in size as to contribute to the development pattern of diverse small-scale new structures and retention of existing structures. Exemption from parking and loading requirements will result in a building design that is more appropriate to its location and the fabric of the neighborhood and the other Central Square Overlay districts as above. Any concerns about those findings? Yes, Ted.
Not a concern, but a question I just don't recall. Was this development reduced to 90%, or will they be making the cash contribution?
All right. Formula business, as was previously noted, this is for the existing formula business, the Bank of America, that will continue on the ground floor. The design reflects, amplifies, and strengthens the established historical character of existing buildings and storefronts in Central Square. The particulars of the building or storefront design are varied from the formula or standard design of the chain in order to reflect the unique character and conditions of Central Square generally, or the specific location in particular. And standard elements of the enterprise defining it as a formula business are modified to respect and provide unique expressions of Central Square history and traditions, as well as innovative physical design and marketing that will distinguish the Central Square location from other locations of the formula business. Any concerns about those findings?
I think this proposal includes redoing the signage for the bank. And so I think this proposal includes redoing the signage for the bank into a smaller and much more tasteful thing that's more.
The signage actually has already been changed.
Okay.
And in accordance with the signage ordinance, that actually happened in the intervening months.
Okay. So this permit doesn't cover that, but it doesn't.
Yeah, that's already happened.
Okay.
Clearly, the retention of the arch and the interior structures make this a unique branch in Bank of America's portfolio.
Okay. The special permit for exemption of basement area in the calculation of gross floor area. The uses occupying such exempt GFA support the character of the neighborhood or district in which the applicable lot is located. Any concerns about that finding? No. And finally, we have the general special permit criteria that special permits will normally be granted if the zoning requirements are met, unless it is not found to be in the public interest due to one of the criteria enumerated. All right. So, Ted.
Speak in the mic, please.
The question was whether I skipped over the one about the bank frontage. I must have. Yes, I did. Thank you, Ted. Bank frontage, occupying more than 25 feet of building frontage facing Massachusetts Avenue, or more than 30% of the lot's aggregate building frontage. Again, as with others, that is the same special permit criteria findings for the Central Square Overlay District as we have made several times before, which is undoubtedly why I skipped over it. Not that I just didn't see it. Yes, so we have already concluded that we can make those findings, but thank you, Ted, for making sure that we listed all of them. All right. Therefore, is there a motion to grant the special permit with the conditions listed in the staff memos and as presented in the various presentations culminating today from the applicant, making the findings that the proposal conforms to the applicable criteria in the zoning ordinance?
Madam Chair, excuse me, could I just speak for 1 minute?
I'm afraid the time for public comment has already come and gone.
I understand that, and I had trouble getting here, and there was no transportation for me to take it, so I was late. But I thought it was worth coming because I think this is a very significant project for Central Square to absorb at this point, and I would like to say something about that.
I'm afraid that you know, there is a process here. This is a fourth public hearing we have had on this project.
I know.
And there has been ample opportunities to submit written comments. We have already closed public comment on this matter.
Oh.
All right. So.
My big question is, why wasn't there a Cambridge? I'm not sure this is a legal process. I know there was no Cambridge Historical Commission review of this project, and
the status of this project before the Historical Commission is irrelevant to whether or not the Planning Board should be hearing this. If you have a question about the Historical Commission, you should take it up with the Historical Commission.
You don't feel this is a major revision to an historic building that should be addressed by the Cambridge Historical Commission at a hearing for all the...
I have no opinion on whether or not the Historical Commission should do anything with this.
Well, so I think
this is a matter before the Planning Board, and again, we are not taking public comment at this time. Okay. I would ask that you please sit down. Thank you. All right. Returning to my request for a motion, is there a motion to grant the requested special permits with the conditions listed in the staff memo based on the findings that we have just reviewed, that the proposal conforms to the applicable criteria in the zoning ordinance?
Yes, so moved.
Second.
Okay, Steve moves and Louis seconds. All those in favor? All those opposed? All right, that's 6 board members voting in favor, 1 opposed. The permits are granted. Thank you very much. We will take a brief recess to allow the movement of the model and the board members to stretch their legs. Thank you.
They said okay. It's okay. They said okay. So you may have a little more
Hi.
sunlight. You may have a little more sunlight for maybe a couple of. Sorry, John. Thank you, Mary. Pebble, good for you. Good for you for sticking up. Well, you did fine. I commend you. I commend you for your guts, your integrity, your courage under fire. Of course, he was all rigged. He was all rigged.
Did you talk to Swati or somebody about where she's at and everything? Oh, okay.
She said we could be in the gallery.
She's helping them, yeah.
We were going to go in that corner so we could see.
Okay, I think wherever you want to go is fine.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
but the rest of them it was okay. So thank you for checking.
Yeah.
I do remember Laurie saying that, you know, when you sit somewhere closer to that, you will
Yeah, there's
actually
some
get
area
that.
that you do get an echo, but yeah, we weren't getting an echo into the stream, so
As long as the
I was like,
broadcast
the
goes
broadcast is fun, right? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kira.
Oh,
Hi,
nice to meet you.
This is Jason.
Yes.
Thanks
Is this
very
okay
much.
for you?
It should be good. And having that camera there, and I talked to Calvin, and he said he'll make it available.
Right.
That was
So
a great
sorry,
idea.
This has been
No.
such a
That you
chaotic
tipped me
for
off to
us
that
to-
is perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, trying to get back into the remote, from the remote to in-person. So I'm sorry if I'm sorry.
No, you got me to the right. Okay, thank you so much.
Down in front. No, just kidding.
Get darker outside.
So Wisdom is here in the first case.
Are you running the cameras?
Yes.
That are in here?
No, I'm a transcriptionist.
Yeah, he was here for the first one. I just don't know if he's
That one must be the one that picks it.
Yes, I think so.
Then I need to be on that side.
Oh, because you're going to cross the axis.
I don't think it's going to be as contentious. Yeah, no, those fights were those are some tough fights, but I think tonight's going to be hopefully some smooth sailing. Let's hope. Yeah, I actually reviewed it. I thought it was excellent. Excellent. So, I'm going to speak in support and say, this is a great thing, and we need to move it ahead because the amount of money that it's going to cost. Absolutely. Oh. It's a very good thing.
We should all just get high and it'll all be okay.
I just want to thank him, okay? Thank you. We'll be in touch, okay? I will reach out to you, okay? I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you. Yeah, we tried. I will be in touch with you. I will reach out to you, okay? Okay? All right. Her name is Pebble. Her name is Pebble. She is she is on our she is an activist. She was trying to speak, but she got here too late.
But if you're just going to know,
Now there's another one.
trust me, trust me. Sure. 3 strikes and you're in. 3 strikes and you're in. Well, 3 strikes and you're out. 3 strikes and you're in. 3 times back. Give it.
Okay, let's come back into session. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing on case PB 379, a special permit application by Ivy League Technologies LLC to convert an existing space to a cannabis retail store at 95 First Street. And we will again begin with CDD staff summarizing why this is before us.
Thank you, Catherine. Let me just relocate my notes. So this is a new special permit application. This is a site located in the Business A zoning district. Cannabis retail stores are allowed by special permit from the planning board. As a point of interest, this location is also subject to a previously granted planning board PUD special permit, case PB 231A. I think this is the first time that a otherwise planning board case has a proposed cannabis retail store. The criteria for approval of this application, along with comments from CDD zoning and urban design staff, are provided in a memo. Staff are present to answer any questions the board might have, and comments are also provided in a memo from the Traffic, Parking, and Transportation Department. I don't believe anyone is present, but we can do our best to answer questions as they come up.
All right, thank you very much. The presenter for the applicant is Chauncey Spencer. You will have up to 30 minutes for your presentation. The board, of course, may allow you additional time if necessary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the public, and members of the board also. My name is Chauncey Spencer. I am the owner of Ivy League Technologies, applicant for today for a marijuana retail dispensary, DBA support. Next slide. Presentation agenda will consist of a description of the management team and supporting partners, project overview, community impact, and an appendix which has reasons why the application conforms to the ordinance, a list of relevant Cannabis Control Commission regulations from the CM 500, and renderings based on CED suggestions and further review. Next slide. Ownership and operation and ownership and operational support. Regarding the information about myself and ownership, I'm the sole owner of Ivy League Technologies LLC. I'm the state's second certified economic empowerment applicant. And I've been part of the first cohort of graduates from the Cannabis Control Commission Social Equity Program. Since receiving the economic empowerment certification, I've worked to increase inclusion of economic empowerment applicants and Black people in the cannabis industry, those who have been impacted by the war on drugs. I've worked with regulators, city officials, in creating policy, and by going before the country, essentially sharing my, my experience, and also my younger experience with cannabis prohibition. Including some of the details of my business endeavor also has been part of this this journey here. But I'll spare you that. Let me just. I'm formally trained as a biochemistry or biochemist, and self-taught in a number of areas: electrical engineering, horticulture, computer programming, and a whole host of technical skills. I intend to bring these skills to my establishment to create a unique experience for Sankofa customers. With me in management is my brother, Darryl Spencer, currently executive chef for a publicly traded restaurant company. He has worked for well over a decade, or has a well over a decade experience opening restaurants, hiring staff, training, and other administrative responsibilities. Darryl is one of the hardest working individuals I know, and I can think of no one better suited to help me in this space. Technical, or just back one. Technical and operational support is Curaleaf, the world's largest cannabis company. They have offered operational and technical support to my company to help us succeed and ensure compliance to local and state regulations. Next slide. The proposed project is the site is 95 First Street. I'm proposing an adult use retail dispensary. It's a new retail cannabis store. Again, the name's Sokofa. It will occupy 4,575 square feet of space in the existing newly constructed one-story box building on the corner of First and Hurley. Base zoning for the site is Business A, and it is in the PUD 4B district, which allows for the use with conformance with the special permit requirements. The presentation is intended to evidence that, and the evidence that the project meets all permit requirements. Next slide, please. The site is in an existing building that was constructed under Planning Board special permit on First Street in a district that allows a broad range of residential and commercial uses, including retail. And this site is already permitted for retail use under the PUD special permit. The space to be utilized is occupied by the multi-state retailer Loyal Companion. I now have the opportunity to be a local economic empowerment owner, bringing dozens of jobs for residents and those impacted by prohibition, while having a storefront that maintains the character of other buildings in the area. The store is located in a very walkable area, has bike lanes, abundant private parking supply, and access to public transportation with on-site parking. Next slide, please. Here's a corner perspective of the building and dispensary at First and Hurley. Containing the building application is my solution to the problem of maintaining cannabis and cannabis products out of public view while activating the streetscape. Next slide, please. I thought the idea that other applicants had to create a gallery space for a local artist was a wonderful idea. So on the north side of the site, in the First Street facing area, we'll include a gallery also. Next slide. Here's a 10,000 foot view of the site. In green is the dispensary. Customers will enter through the main entrance on First Street and exit the same way. The employee entrance is adjacent to the parking lot in the rear of the building. This is a parking lot that is accessed via Hurley Street. Also in the rear is an emergency exit, which we'll speak of later when we talk about CDD suggestions. We have no intentions on installing any mechanical units. Therefore, there will be none protruding above the louvers on the roof. Next slide, please. This is the main floor plan. The right side of the page is First Street, and the bottom is Hurley Street. Customers originating from and moving in the direction of the blue arrows will enter through through First Street, main entrance, where they will immediately have their IDs age verified. They'll move through the queuing area, past the turnstiles, and onto the sales floor. Once on the sales floor, they will be greeted by associates who will help them with their selection or direct them to the appropriate station. The transaction counter is located in the center of the store, and then customers moving in the direction of the red arrows will exit through First Street doorway. I believe one of the great things about this space is that it is the larger occupancy, or has a larger occupancy than most other applications. 71 total, 15 employees, 56 customers are expected. The queuing area is designed to hold roughly 2 to 3 people. This size for the queuing is based on, or this queuing area is based on the projections that peak hour customers counts will result in 3 customers entering and leaving per minute, which is basically the rate limiting factor. ID checks are performed in seconds, and it can be expected that 3 ID checks will be conducted in well under a minute. According to regulations, IDs must be verified immediately, and waiting areas for that purpose seem to contradict that requirement. Waiting areas for over-occupancy reasons should not be considered for this establishment, because the need for waiting area is not supported by the projections. Our customer can arguably handle 224 customers per an hour, assuming that they are staying a maximum of 15 minutes because of our capacity of 56 customers at one time. The hours proposed are 10 to 11 p.m. Monday through Friday, 10 to 11 p.m. Saturday, and 11 a.m. to 8 on Sunday. There is no vestibule based on the measurements of under 3,000 square feet. It is not required. The corridors were included in total space, but there are rooms with doors that reduce the size of the main exposed exterior door, or the main area exposing the exterior door. Next slide, please. Here is an interior view from the queuing area. We will bring some, we'll be using some variation of neutral colors for display cases and counters. We're committed to working with the CDD to make whatever further suggestions, tweaks to our layout that are deemed necessary to ensure good customer circulation. In the appendix are a couple of renderings based on those suggestions from CDD that were not included in the application. Next slide, please. Here's another interior view from the center aisle looking toward the rear of the store. Next slide, please. Here's another interior view overlooking the transaction area. You'll see the glass at the counter will be opaque to shield the public from potential views of cannabis and cannabis products. Next slide, please. I'd like to discuss the traffic and mobility for a few slides. I worked with TP&T to develop a plan which required I assess the transportation issues associated with the project and create a transportation operations plan. As a result, TP&T has submitted a memo which is largely in accordance with my plan, except for one minor oversight on my part that I'll address. Highlights of that plan. And again, I put in my plan that it would be 65% subsidy, but we'll provide 100% TPAS subsidies to employees to promote public transit and promote public transit options to employees and customers. We'll establish a pre-ordering system that will expedite customer orders and by extension reduce the time of a transaction in the establishment. All employees will be provided Blue Bike memberships. And one additional thing we need to do is, because we will not be doing appointment only, we will not be doing an appointment only opening period. Is we need to develop a clear and concise opening day plan to ensure the facility is operating in a manner that is safe and efficient on that day. Next slide, please. There is on-site parking in the rear of the store. Also, a number of private and public garage parking spaces available in the area. Zip car parking too. On-street metered parking. I'm not going to go through all the public transit options, but the Green Line, Beechmere plays a large role in how customers and employees will access the store. There are a number of buses that terminate there. Easy Ride buses are a stop away from the store front door. And finally, Blue Bike stations nearby. A list of these options will be prominently displayed on the company website for customers to view. Next slide, please. There seems to be an oversight on my part about the number of short-term bike spaces. There are 6 racks, but each rack holds 2 bikes. Actually, the number would be 12. Loading will occur 4 times a week for cash and products. This loading will occur after hours in the rear of the building, utilizing off-street parking reserved for customers. Cannabis products will be, as required by state regulations, be acquired from a Cannabis Control Commission licensed establishment. Next slide. Here's an enlarged view of the rear of the building where we expect where we expect employees to access the store for loading, and the long-term bike parking where we can hold 6 bikes. In this space, there will be a small kitchenette or lockers for employees. Next slide. Community impact. My company will contribute $40,000 to the New England Innocence Project, which is located here in Cambridge and works to free wrongfully convicted individuals from prison. I cannot think of a better organization to contribute given my personal experience with having to fight false accusations a block away from the establishment I intend to operate. Through that experience, I've seen the need for competent legal representation, and I wish to aid as much as I can. 80% of the organization's clients come from Cambridge and Boston. Next slide. And unfortunately, I haven't had any feedback from the abutters or the business community, but I look forward to getting to know the community through different outreach strategies as I continue to work on this project going forward, should the planning board allow me to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. This is a public hearing, so we will now turn to public comment. As of 5 p.m. yesterday, the board had received written communications from Joseph Rose and Charles Hines. Written communications received after 5 p.m. yesterday will be entered into the record. We'll begin by calling on speakers who signed up to speak, but after that, anyone else who is present and wishes to speak in this case will have the opportunity to do so. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak before I ask you to wrap up, and I believe CDD actually has an audible signal for when that 3 minutes is has elapsed. All right. So the first person who has signed up for this special permit hearing is Pebble Gifford. She, okay, Ms. Gifford left and had been here for the earlier hearing. Okay, thank you. The next person who has signed up is Chandra, and I'm sorry, I can't read your last name here. Okay. Can you please come forward and give your name and address for the stenographer?
You're perfectly glad to. Hold on one sec, please.
And if you could spell your name for me, please.
Hi, I'm Chandra, Chandra, last name Batra, Batra.
Thank you.
Give your address.
And I live at 52 Trowbridge, apartment 5 in Cambridge.
Great.
So right down the street from here. I'm honored to be here to represent a Black-owned company that I believe in, and someone who's been working for well over 3 years to get himself into an actual space. I have dear friends who are part of the first cohort, and it's an honor to be here to represent Chauncey Spencer. And I'm truly looking forward to the community impact that this company will bring, because I grew up on Washington Street in Cambridge. I grew up in Area 4, and I saw the worst of the drug war. My youngest baby brother was adversely affected and spent part of his youth in a group home because he was caught dealing crack on the streets of Cambridge. And I am so glad that as drug laws lessen and we actually are legalizing cannabis, and I hope that this leads to kids actually considering the fact that they don't have to grow up and do such things. And I hope that this company can work with the youth of the city and actually develop job training opportunities with Cambridge Rindge and Latin and with the other high schools to get youth, and especially Black youth, into the cannabis industry. This can be a growth industry for Black youth as well as breaking the curse of generational poverty through generational wealth and education. And I've been a cannabis activist since I was 14. I'm one of the reasons that Question 3 in the state got passed, because I'm a medical activist as well as someone who fought hard for legalization. And I believe that we have the right to cannabis in the state, and that we have a right to have businesses that reflect our values. And Sankofa does reflect the values of everything that I've worked for as an activist for the last 40 years of my life. And I'm looking very, very forward to working with Sankofa and working with a dear friend of mine and showing him that Cambridge is a unified community and that there is power in actually helping the people. And that's one of the things that that I've been waiting a really long time to say, because I was supposed to work for Greenheart, which would have been Andrew D'Angelo's dispensary out of California, and the signs at Harborside that say power for the people, that's real. And I hope that Sankofa can actually stand up and prove to the state, prove not only to the state, but also to the city why equity is important, why cannabis is important, and why it's important to have people who are my color, and I'm half black and half Indian, my daddy was from India, why it's so important to have people of color in positions of leadership. And I look very, very forward to working with Sankofa to be a leadership model. And as a leadership model, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Marie-June Pierre.
Hi, my name is Marie-June Pierre. I live at 357 Harvard Street in Cambridge, and I've known Chauncey since about 2013, and I know how extremely hard he's fought to essentially make this come to fruition, and I support what he's doing. I do support legalization as well in the cannabis industry. I do think he will essentially foster the workforce here. He'll give opportunities to the youth, specifically, I guess, young people who have been disadvantaged by the industry, people who haven't had the opportunities essentially to build themselves up. And I do think that this is something that we need, and I really do hope that he gains success in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Heather Hoffman.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. And I wish that I were standing here to support this, but I am not for only one reason. And I want to make it really, really clear that this is the reason. The applicant has done zero outreach. It's detailed in the letter from the East Cambridge planning team that you got. And I can tell you that we gave every single applicant a respectful hearing. You did not have people who thought that, as I've said in a few hearings, that that marijuana is going to kill us all. I am so sorry that you did not reach out to us, because we would have wanted to talk to you. We would have wanted to hear your plans, and the only criteria we've ever looked for is people who seem to have a clue and know what they're doing. We have supported through thick and thin the business that might actually open up at what is still Lechmere Rug. And so I'm really sorry that for whatever reason, you didn't talk to any of your neighbors, or the people you would like to be your neighbors, because we would probably support you. I do not partake. I managed to get through college in the 70s in a state where marijuana was as close to legal as it could possibly be without being legal. So legal that people openly grew it in their windows. And I never partook because I'm a cheap date. But I can't support this without having you come and talk to us and meet us and let us meet you. And that's all we ask. So what I hope is that, as the East Cambridge Planning Team letter requests, that you will continue this so that Mr. Spencer can come and meet the people who would like to be his neighbors. And then you can tell the world if I'd lied about how we treat you, because I think that you will be pleasantly surprised, because we just want good neighbors. So thank you.
Thank you. That is everyone who's signed up to speak. Sir?
Hi, Dan Totten, 54 Bishop Allen Drive, number 2. And I just, I decided to stay when I saw Mr. Spencer's application on the agenda, because he's someone that I've been speaking to for almost years now about this stuff, and I've followed his journey, and I encourage you to search his name on your favorite podcast app, because there's an amazing podcast where they get into his story in great detail, and it's fascinating. So definitely give it a listen. I have immense respect for my neighbor who lives right down the street from the location. However, I feel differently about this, and here's why. First of all, if you read the application carefully, the applicant did reach out to the business association, and I actually spoke with him earlier and just asked about that, and he reached out to them multiple times, and they have not replied to him and not engaged with him. I understand the business association and the neighborhood association are not the same thing. However, I think it is daunting to be in his shoes and to be trying to do outreach and to not get a response and to get ignored by the association that should be on your side. It's disappointing that the East Cambridge Business Association would ignore the outreach and then not come here and support a business when we're talking about an economic crisis. This is a business that would really be great. I think that that it's complicated. I've come before the board before and had the same complaint about development, about buildings that are going up in my neighborhood that I want to talk about. And this is different. This is a store. And Nico Bowie very brilliantly said at the last cannabis hearing over in Harvard Square, he said that if this were an Apple store, we wouldn't be doing this. And the disproportionate impact that Mr. Spencer and others like him have felt, and it's very deep, means that if you continue this hearing, the consequences for Mr. Spencer are dire. So I would ask that if you continue this hearing, that you give Mr. Spencer the same treatment that you gave the hotel people at the April meeting, and you schedule a hearing right now as soon as you can, as soon as it can be noticed, the minimum time, because the moratorium is going to expire in September. This guy needs to move forward. There is nothing possible to object to about it. Meets every piece of the criteria. There's nothing that could be objected to that would benefit from having a community meeting. I think that they should commit to having a community meeting as a condition of the special permit or after the special permit is granted. He would do it, and I think it would be a productive meeting. So that's what I would ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present who wishes to be heard on this matter? Okay, hearing none. Board members, clarifying questions for the staff or the applicant? Ted.
For whatever reason, I did not see the context map. And if somebody has it, I would like to see that. I was looking for the map that would show the proximity to any school or playground or, I guess it's Appendix 3. I guess the context is when I look on maps, I see what appears to be a park or a playground a block or two away down Hurley Street, and I was just curious how close that it actually is.
May I answer that? Yeah, that's the Anthony Acosta playground. That's probably about 380 some odd feet away from the lot. It may be a little bit more than that. I'm just pulling that number out of my head. There we go.
Looking for. I have another question for staff. In the memo, there were references to the doorways having a vestibule and whether that needed to exist for compliance with, I guess, ADA and environmental issues. But my understanding is the building was just built. And there is a store in there now that appears not to have a vestibule. And so is there a rationale why this building needs to have, or why this use needs to have a vestibule that Loyal Companion did not? And then another question I have is, could somebody explain the visual screening mechanism that is proposed to be used? Because obviously, if this exists and the CCC is going to allow it, why haven't we been able to use it in any of the other cannabis hearings, permits we've worked on? So that's...
So why don't we start with staff on that question first, and then we can talk about the visual screening.
Okay.
Can you please
Sure.
use your mic?
Yes. My name is Khalil Mugasabi, CDD on behalf of Urban Design staff. So we raised the question related to the vestibule primarily because it was really at the threshold of 3,000 square feet. So we merely asked the question that needs to be verified with ISD. We felt that the square footage, it really kind of, if you don't mind going to slide number 15, I'm asking the applicant, if you measure the entire area, now we were not provided, staff were not provided with any scale drawings to kind of verify that the actual space is actually less than 3,000 square feet. So the International Energy Conservation Code, and that's the state code, we don't typically get involved in analyzing the code. We merely make a reference for the applicant to check with ISD. But that entire area, if you will, that it's open, including the corridor leading to the interior spaces, should be factored in as in the calculation. Now, we don't want to get into whether the previous retail area was compliant or not. We didn't want to make that judgment. It is plausible that the previous space could have had less square footage than 3,000 square feet, and that's really the threshold. So the answer to your question is that we're merely asking the applicant to double check with ISD. As far as the film, that's I'm going to refer to the applicant. I think he can speak to. I believe that's applied to the actual case inside, so it merely prevent the viewer, the public, from actually seeing the product. So it's not on the exterior glazing, but it's actually on the actual display case. That's it's a manufacturer, I believe, that manufactured that, and I'm not sure if it has been approved yet by the state, and I think in the applicant's application. I believe we're waiting for a confirmation. So but I would refer to the applicant if he has more information on the film. Thank you.
I would like to refer to the actual regulations because the problem is that we would have to submit our application to the Cannabis Control Commission. They will not do a review prior to, so we have to actually get provisional license or have our application reviewed for a provisional license, and then they would review that aspect of it and approve or deny or ask for more information about it, and then have that conversation. But even after that, it would have to pass final inspection before we would even open. So, my position is that it's not something that will not be reviewed by the CCC, and it would, if they are against it, it would prohibit my store from opening.
I think, and I don't want to speak for Ted, I know I would be curious, and the reason why it falls within the CDD's, or the planning board's purview really, is because we have had to accept a lot of urban design measures for other stores that we generally prefer not to, and if what you are proposing is actually something that would pass muster with the state, frankly, it would have resulted in better design in a lot of stores. And so the question of whether or not the state would accept it as a solution has kind of implications beyond this, because it certainly opens up a lot better design options if it were.
Yeah, well, I would say that the lack of there's been a lack of imagination because lawyers typically create the the rules and the designs for these buildings. So I think that it kind of it allows for me to add a little bit more imagination to things, because I come from a different realm. So immediately I would say, why not use some type of optical methods to diffuse the person's ability to look in there, and light or what have you. So I chose, exactly that. And if you could look at the regulations, I did put that in the appendix of the presentation, and it's pretty spelled out. And the third regulation, I wish I had it here. I don't have it in front of me, but if you go to, I think, actually go up 4 more. Actually, I think it might be a couple more up the.
Yeah.
Ted, I
need you to speak in
don't
the
think the mic is on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't understand, if I'm outside looking in, will I see those, display cases and not see the things that are sitting in it?
Exactly.
And
So
what is
you would-
preventing me from seeing that?
It's a filter. Essentially, it's a thin filter that you can only view from a couple of feet nearby.
So
And
it would go on the top of the counters?
Exactly. Or go directly on top of the product
So
case
directly on
itself.
top, so I'd have to be standing within a couple feet of the product, looking down at it, in order to be able to see the product itself.
That's exactly. So it has like a 60-degree viewing window, so you have to be within that 60 degrees of that plane, right? So now if I were to tilt it that direction, then someone from outside would be able to see it, but we're going to have it flat.
Hugh.
So there are some vertical display cabinets, and I'm assuming there isn't prohibited product in those?
If we were to use that setup, we would just orient the screens so that the plane is not facing anyone that would be looking in that direction. So you have a lot of flexibility. I mean, I could put it, it doesn't matter where you put it. You could put it probably directly at the window, and if you just tilt it, they would still not be able to see.
So my other question is, I take it, when does the customer actually get the product in his hands? Is that back in the transaction area?
Yes. So they would end up getting the product in a package, the package that they would take out of the store. So they still behind that opaque glass screen, the public will not be able to see past that. And so when they make their transaction, they will be provided with the product.
So they're not transporting it from a display case to the transaction, which is the way a lot of retail works. But okay. So I would ask I'll ask you this question. If we put a condition that the amount of clear glass in the final building be the same as shown on your application, would that be an acceptable condition? Because what I'm concerned about is the CCC will say, no, you've got to have opaque surfaces for all of the glass. That would change the substance of the application from our point of view. So, I mean, I can imagine a sequence of events whereas we approve it, we include that condition, you go to the CCC and you make some deal with the CCC. I'm not sure you deal with them or whether you just receive deals from them, but nevertheless, your application is approved with certain conditions that are inconsistent with our conditions. Then you'd have to come back here before you could finally get an occupancy permit. And you'd be in a real state of limbo. We wouldn't like being played by the CCC, but we probably would accept it, but we require you to do something else to, as all these other people who've come to us have done various things to make the storefront not look like a blank wall. So that's a question, I guess.
I guess I would accept that. I'm confident in my ability to get this past the CCC. I can't imagine, that their regulations are pretty well spelled out, and it would be a fight for them to stop me from doing this because it's pretty, it's effective.
Okay.
Actually, two. I'm really kind of disappointed you didn't reach out to the East Cambridge planning team. Yeah, I'm going to take care of that now. Kind of disappointed you didn't reach out to the East Cambridge planning team. That wasn't a good first step. My other question is, and will you consider doing that? My other question is, how do you plan on not overwhelming the existing parking at the location? Could make for some kind of tense moments with your neighbors, the other businesses in the, so I don't know how you plan on not overwhelming that. And the 3M screen, it's very directional. I don't know if they're going to like that because they won't be able to control the direction that you can't see through it, you know what I mean? So I understand what you're trying for, but the CCC, that may be their one big complaint about that. It's completely directional, and if it moves, somebody moves it, you can see in, so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I could work with them, but you know, if it's as simple as gluing and nailing something down, then that'll be the case. But it'll be an affixed, you know, stationary object. You know, I'm not going to have people just, you know, run through there. Say again.
Could you,
okay.
could you
All
use the mic, please, Lou?
I used one on a computer, so I understand the system.
You would think that after a year of telling everyone you're on mute, that we wouldn't have to do that in person, and yet, here we are. I do want to get back to Lou's question, though, regarding the East Cambridge Planning Team and your thoughts on how to reach out to them and interact with them going forward.
Yes. So, first of all, I apologize to anyone who feels I did not consider them in the planning and the entry into this community. Certainly was not my intention. You know, I've been through this a number of times. I've met with many community members. I've been hit with over the head many times. So it's not something I fear. I've been, you know, I've told my story. I've presented myself to the world, for that matter. I have no fear in you know, meeting with the community at all. I welcome the community. It was certainly a oversight. Honestly, I don't want to say that I thought I did, but obviously I didn't. And so I'm not gonna, you know, go deal with that. I'm not gonna go look through emails or anything like that. But I obviously did not. And moving forward, of course, I can have a number of different conversations, you know, and allow the community to get to know me, know what I plan to do, what I bring to the community, my future plans, and I'm certain that the community would be more than supportive of everything I'm coming to bring to the community. And so immediately after today, I will set up meetings with the appropriate groups and people and hear what they have to say. And in regards to the parking, I believe that we created pretty, I won't call it robust, but I think it's a sufficient plan to increase T ridership, you know, amongst the employees, and we're going to prominently put the options, the parking options, directly on our website, and so hopefully that, you know, I would expect that people that want to come there learn. Or who access the website will learn of the other options that are available to them, and that also that that we believe that our peak hours, and according to our study, the peak hours do not conflict with the neighbors' peak hours. So the other tenants, their peak hours are before before we're even operational. So, and that's say the Sherman-Williams. Their peak hours are like at 7 a.m. or, you know, to 9, and we're not even operational at that time. And our peak hours are later in the evening. So and also the post office, and they're closed after 5. You know, so it's kind of like we kind of cross and cross ships. You know.
My concern is when they need to have a few parking spots for people to jump in, you will have them all occupied during the middle of the day.
During the middle of the day.
You know, peak hours, I understand you're early and late. It's during the day, you only have, like, there are 11 parking spots in this, I think. If they're full of your customers, where do their customers park? See, this is you could overwhelm the parking in that spot and put an undue burden on those two other businesses. That's really all I'm concerned with.
Though, just a comment that his customers will be coming and going quickly.
So do theirs.
Well, exactly, and as his leave, there'll be openings for others.
My concern is he has several hundred customers a day called out here, and I don't think there's other competitive, the other businesses in that lot will have that many people. Just to see how you feel like you're going to address this, because I believe it's going to happen.
There is, again, ample supply of additional parking in the area. There's, there's metered parking also, and based on our study, I believe that we'll have a need of roughly about 15 to 17 spots necessary for supporting our customers even during peak hours.
And that's per hour, correct?
Yes. No, excuse me. Per 15-minute interval, because that's based upon the customers coming in, cycling through maximum 15 minutes. Now, we know that customers will likely only stay in somewhere between 7 and 15, but we wanted to just be consistent in our calculations. And so, I suspect that we will be able to mitigate some of that traffic also with online ordering and expediting the time in which customers will be staying in there.
Okay, so just trying to avoid it is what we're going to
absolutely
try to do.
But we'll keep an eye on it.
And did you say you also don't have an opening plan with the city yet?
Not with the city, but we will be working with the city to create
and no appointment only, no
appointment only.
Yeah, that may be something to consider for the first opening.
Mary.
Thank you.
Whoops. So I have two questions. One is, in the staff memo, it says that you're intending to apply for a delivery operator license if it's permissible in Cambridge in the future, but one of your slides said that you would not be doing delivery. So I just want clarification. Does it say that because it's not allowed now and it's still intending to do it in the future? So that's one question. My other question is, in terms of queuing, particularly around the opening, you mentioned that there's room in the parking area. But traffic and parking has said they don't want any queuing on the sidewalk. So how are you going to manage, letting people in the back know that it's time for them to come up to the door?
If you look at one of our slides, we will have a QR code where people will be able to scan and get their number in the queue, and it'll be through their phone. And we can just give them a phone call or a text message, or they'll be automatically able to look right into their phone and see where they're at. But it's not anticipated based upon our projections for that store. Like I said, we have a huge capacity, 25% more capacity than what is projected.
And the delivery?
And the delivery. I'm going to be careful here. In the application, it's not proposed. However, we're in this, I would hate for the planning board to not allow for that to be, would not allow for it to be conducted in our establishment, or by our establishment. So I just would hope the planning board would be considerate of that. Because I understand that the city has not, made a judgment call on that. However, again, the delivery is a right of retailers. Or according to the state, not yet by the city. So I would just want to clarify that it's not in our proposal, but we don't want to have it, or we would hope it would not be prohibited for our establishment.
Well, the planning board doesn't make the rules regarding that. We don't make the ordinances up, but there is a proposal to consider it. So I think, you know, one of the things to do is ponder what happens if the ordinance does pass. You know, maybe put something in the decision about that so that you wouldn't have to come back. Okay. Thank you.
And thank you. You'd be applying to the CCC for the delivery license, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's another whole. So that's what I mean. Some of these things that could take quite a while, and they change the outcome of your proposal.
You?
All right. So as I'm beginning to think you're not going to be assigned for specific parking spaces. Is that correct?
I'm saying it one more time.
Are you going to be assigned specific parking spaces for your business?
I will have to have that conversation with the owner going forward, because as it stands right now, there are not. But of course, that would be something that me and the owner and other tenants would want to obviously have, for obvious reasons, right? But there are 4 spots exclusive to that location.
Okay, so we don't know what's going to happen. So the reason I'm asking this question is that in the photo of the parking area that you submitted, there's a big painted sign that says Post Office Delivery Vehicle Loading Zone, something like that. Now and it blocks, if there's a vehicle there, that vehicle blocks access to any parking places that are directly opposite whatever vehicle the post office has. So, if you get the first 4 spaces and the post office, can't park in front of them, then that's not a problem. Or if the post office, only comes between 7 and 10 o'clock in the morning, it's not. There are lots, but there might be a case where it would be a problem. And I guess I'm trying to ask you to think through that and figure out how you could address this. Now, perhaps I'm overstepping our responsibility, and I can simply let traffic and parking in their review and their ongoing work with you work that out. But that's my observation, that there's potential for problems there.
Yeah, the loading for Sherwin-Williams also would take place there. I remember this proposal when it first got built. That was one of the concerns, was loading into the parking in front of the businesses.
It's not going to be a problem with his loading because he's going to be off-peak.
I thought and you guys are probably a little bit more familiar with their proposal than I am, but I thought that and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, the post office loading is closer to the north-facing side of the parking lot. If you could, this is what, according to what I think here, I think have a picture of that, right? Thought I had a picture of it, and yes, in the appendix 2. Yeah, that's actually adjacent to the building.
A 22-foot wide maneuvering space that you need to get cars in and out of the parking spaces. It's 22 feet from the bollards to the start of the parking space. And so you can't back out. You'll hit a postal truck if it's in the wrong place. I mean, and he's not going to know what's right or wrong. He's just going to do what he has to do. Now, again, I'm an architect. I've designed a gazillion parking lots. I know these numbers, really.
So it won't be. So you feel it won't be enough space for the vehicles? Okay.
Yeah. But maybe you should deal through TP&T because they're really the guys who have the understanding of the subtleties here. I just want to, as long as I've got the floor, I just want to see if there's anything else on my list. I have a very minor question, and it doesn't really affect the substance, but where's the trash going to be held before it gets taken out? I understand there are two kinds of trash. There's product trash and there's non-product trash. One goes back with a delivery guy. The other one goes to wherever dumpsters go. And there are two dumpsters down at the end of the lot. I don't know whose dumpsters those are.
The non-regulated trash would be in the break room. We couldn't imagine that we would need a separate area for that, so it would be in the break room. And the regulated trash would definitely go back. Well, in the interim for waiting for a manufacturer to come pick it up or the person who delivered it in the first place, that would go into a quarantine area.
Okay, thanks.
Tom?
Well, suffice it to say, there's a fair amount of emotion, I think, around these types of businesses. Not so much here at the planning board, because I think this is the 13th or the 14th one we've reviewed, and we understand the comings and goings, and so the fear has been largely wrung out. But that's not true in the broader community, and so that outreach and the misunderstanding, as you understand far more deeply than I do around this business, means that outreach to the community is really important, and getting their input to address their concerns and to lower the tenor around it. So that's important. I think the proposal is imaginative, especially I was really taken by the idea about the display cases. I've used that product before. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I don't understand what the fear is. Stuff's legal. What's the big deal? If you don't want your mother to know that you're smoking grass, I don't know. That I just assume that it's better that it's transparent. So if you've figured that out, congratulations, because I think it's really a huge innovation. So maybe there's more money in those display cases than in the retail business.
Possibly.
But there is a little bit of a risk for you, and you're willing to accept that to go forward if we make a condition that we really find that transparency appealing and consistent with our community values around the openness around this product. So I don't know where the sense of the board is relative to at what sequence that community input should happen. I could go either way, whether that happens before or after a vote.
Well, we seem to, as is our wont, have transitioned from clarifying questions to discussion. So I would welcome other input from board members on that, or other thoughts on how we might proceed tonight. Ted?
Well, since we've handled so many of these, and have generally exhibited a fair amount of disdain for what we have to do with these. But on the other hand, just recently with the Reagan proposal, where there was a failure of public input, and we felt that it had to go back. Personally, I feel that in the absence of significant public input and the opportunity for the public to come and tell us that it shouldn't be in their neighborhood, even though they voted for it, it seems to me we probably have an obligation to say that there has to be a legitimate communication with the public at large and give them the opportunity to opine on it. And, you know, I hate to delay this or any other proposal, but I think, you know, we do have rules and regulations that say there has to be public input, and I don't know whose fault it is if they got misinformation or didn't get the right information, but I think the public has the right to understand what the proposal is and either support it, as one of the neighbors said they probably would, or oppose it, and then we would make a final decision.
Would a meeting with the East Cambridge planning team or a process that would reach resolution with them, would that be sufficient in your point of view?
I mean, I'm hesitant to say what, you know, I think we usually leave it up to CDD to tell the special permit applicant who they have to notify and what they have to do. And maybe in this case, I don't know what other cannabis dispensaries have done, who they've contacted and how they've gotten back, but clearly we've gotten lots of people come in, abutters, and other people come in and say they are favor it or they opposed it, and so they receive notice somehow, and I would imagine that CDD could determine, you know, who was the right party or extent of the notice requirement.
I think you should do a little outreach, and I think there's a couple of loose ends you need to tie up, especially on the parking in your general area, how you're going to handle that and how you control that.
Mary?
I agree. I think that you do need to do a public process before we vote on the permit. And I think Ted's right. I mean, you know, we don't have to specify who it is. Certainly the East Cambridge planning team is a big player, so you do want to talk to them, and then, you know, speak with CDD for advice on who else to contact. And hopefully, you know, they'll be able to move it along quickly. Maybe Heather can help with that.
I mean, I looked down the list of findings, and it seems like there aren't any other red flags. Yeah, we can make those findings. So it's really just the things we've talked about tonight.
I concur. You know, the public outreach is an important part of the planning board rules for a reason. And you know, as much as this has been a really challenging year to do public outreach in, and you are certainly not the first applicant to have told us about, you know, reaching out to one organization or another and get no response. And we have sent them back to do better. I do think that it is appropriate, therefore, to ask that you make another effort to talk to your neighbors and be the good neighbor you want to be. And hopefully the fact that the state of emergency is being lifted is going to make that a little easier than it has been for the past 15 months. But I think we have only seen good things come out of those, out of asking people to have those conversations with neighbors. That doesn't mean there's always agreement that comes out of them, but it does seem to result in people feeling that they're heard and that some of their concerns at a minimum may be addressed. And I think Lou is right in terms of convincing them that you have the parking operations figured out. Is going to that's likely going to be one of the bigger questions you get. So I think it's a good place to explore solutions with your neighbors because they'll be the ones most directly impacted by that.
Madam Chair, doesn't CDD ordinarily help, assist, or even require exactly who needs to be notified?
So maybe I can turn to CDD staff, and I don't know who wants to field this question, but I don't know what direction applicants are given as to this. Jeff, you on the hook for this one, or?
Yeah, I'll do this. Jeff Roberts. Hi. So it is complicated. I mean, as the planning board recalls from their rules, the public engagement or the community engagement is meant to be led by the applicant, hosted by the applicant. The whole point of the process is for the applicant to sort of reach out and try to make connections. We have a few basic things that we advise applicants, reaching out to neighborhood organizations, business organizations, and then the immediate abutters. That doesn't always we're sympathetic to the applicants, as you noted, because it doesn't reaching out doesn't always mean you get attention, and in some circumstances it works out better than others. So we try to work with the applicants to make note that you should try to get a response. If there isn't a response, then we'll talk and try to figure out if there's a better way to reach out that we're aware of. Sometimes we're not aware of what the best ways are to contact certain groups or certain individuals, but we certainly do all that we can, but we don't necessarily have a magic way to make to know all the right contacts either when it comes to making those connections. But we will, as we have with other applicants, if the board wants to have more, we'll work with the applicant to try to improve that outreach and make some recommendations about what can be done.
Chair, if I might add one thing, which is that we are always, the specific reason why the rule requires a standalone meeting as opposed to a meeting just at a neighborhood group is because neighborhood groups don't always capture every single person in the neighborhood. And so, and there has lately been a lot of discussion around the roles of neighborhood groups, not to say that they're not critical and important for the folks who are participants, but really our effort is to speak to that broader engagement and not just focus on any individual group, whether it be a business group or a neighborhood group.
Right. I think that is generally good advice, that there are lots of neighborhood groups throughout Cambridge, both business and residential. But there are a plethora of groups. They're a good place to start. They're usually not the place you should end the outreach. They can point you to other people. They can get the word out about your project, good or bad, but it will make sure that everyone knows it's occurring. And that's a place to start, I would say.
I would just note that this applicant is unique in that he does not have an attorney who is familiar with all the groups and familiar with all the ins and outs and who to contact and so forth. that may be a disadvantage to you, but I find it you're really impressive. So kudos to you that you don't need an attorney here. But on this particular matter, since you don't have an attorney, I think that he should be relying heavily on his staff to give him guidance on who he should be contacting.
So my sense of where we are tonight is that while generally supportive of the application as it stands, there are some procedural hurdles we need you to go through in terms of talking to your neighbors that may or may not result in changes to your proposal. But it would bring you back here for a follow-up hearing and vote after you've had those discussions and addressed, to the best of your ability, any concerns that are brought up in those discussions. Are there specific things beyond the parking operations issue that Lou has flagged that the board wants to highlight? No. All right.
I would, just speaking for myself, anyway, that certainly from what I've heard and seen so far, I want to be clear that I'm reacting very positively to your application. I don't want you to get a misunderstanding from what we're discussing. We're talking strictly about process here and not substance. In substance, I think it's an amazing application. So let's just focus on the process now.
All right. Then is there a motion to continue the hearing? Steve moves.
Second.
Lou seconds. All those in favor? And that is all planning board members voting in favor. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Do we have any general business items? No? Is there anything else from planning board members? Anything else from staff?
I guess I have a question that Jeff can't answer, which is, what's going to happen next week?
So the current, for next week's meeting, we have this room scheduled again. It's our expectation that it'll be, at this point, if there's nothing changes in terms of policies and laws and regulations, we'll be here again.
Okay. So until next week, then, we are adjourned. And thank you all very much, and thank you for coming back.